I see a lot of teams starting on the wrong foot where they go like, okay, we need this big enterprise thing. Let's work for 6 months on like every component we could think of. And it's like, well, we'll never use half of that stuff. So like, why don't we work on the small stuff that we need right now that we know we're going to reuse? And I love your approach to kind of teaching it, in like, if we're working in Figma, let's figure out what screens we're making. Let's figure out what functionality we actually need. And let's build some small systems around that thing. And then if that works, then we can scale it from there. But I see a lot of teams that just going in like wide-eyed and like really ambitious, which is cool, but then they end up building a bunch of stuff that they'll never use, or like one day we'll use this, and it just ends up being like a really bloated system. So I think, small systems that work, that are used often, is much better than a beautiful, robust system that nobody actually uses.
Right. There's something really cool like that. There's a feeling of satisfaction to go, ooh, let's think through all of the elements of the house before we even realize or ask ourselves, do we want to live in a house like this? Is this what we really need? Or do we just need a little like studio apartment? That probably works for us. It works for our lifestyle, and there is that idea, like I live in Texas, I live in Austin. So there's this idea of like everything's better when it's bigger. And it's just not true, right? It's the clutter of like what starts to collect in the average American's garage is like so insane. We thought we needed it. We think we should store it. It just ends up being a lot of trash that we haven't seen in years. We've never utilized.
When you have a big house, you got to pay a big mortgage too. So that's the downside that comes with it. Oh man.
That analogy of mortgage kind of aligns with that idea of like design debt, creating this bloated system. And it's just, I think the more complex things become, the harder even the simpler things within that system become to use, right? Because you have to sift through all the junk to get to the elements that you actually use. And so I something you brought up was really interesting. Like there is a difference between, obviously like large enterprise things, small kind of needs, but there's also a difference between the plane that's currently flying and, building some components and the wings like on the ground. How do we address, especially as like freelancers, we might step into a project or step into working with a client and they already have something running and we have to kind of assemble while it's in the air versus, hey, let's look at this. Very few of us get like these projects from the outset. We get to build everything from scratch. So how do we kind of address those differences?
I love the building the plane in the air metaphor. I just don't know how to extend it. So I have a different one that I'll use, which is I like the idea of like a train station. And one of the things that I tell teams that I work with is like, one of the first things we have to do is we have to accept that some trains have just left. Like, I know we want to board that train. I know we want to work with that team that like, oh, if only we finished that component 2 weeks sooner, they could have included it in their build. That train has left the station. And I was having a chat with the team recently, and they were like, that's one of the hardest things about design system work that they were learning about is that, some train, like you're at the gate, you're waiting to go and you're standing in line and you're watching your train leave. So what do? You get on your phone and you try to book the next train for 5 minutes later. It's like, that's not a good move because that train that's leaving 5 minutes later is also going to leave without you. It's too soon. So what you do is you book the train an hour later. And what's tough about that is when you book the train an hour later, there are going to be 3 other trains that are going to leave while you're standing in line, and that's agonizing. So like that's the metaphor that I tend to use is like sometimes with design system work, you have to figure out what trains you can actually catch. And you can go like, okay, we can work with that team, especially at a large enterprise. That team on their roadmap is this thing that's coming up in 12 weeks from now. And we think we can be ready for that, even though it's more attractive to try and be ready for the thing that's going to ship in 2 weeks, but you're just going to miss that train because you just can't get aligned with them fast enough, especially at large enterprises with lots of moving parts and lots of people, and you got to set up meetings and get a stakeholder approval, all of that kind of stuff. It's like, let's just plan for the thing that's 3 months from now, because we know we can catch that. And now we can be calm and we can be collected. We don't have to rush. We don't have to work nights and weekends. We don't have to do any of that stuff. We can just take our time, do really good work, pair with people, collaborate with them, co-create, have some time to iterate and revise, like do all the good design stuff, that we all want to do anyway. And then actually be able to see something that we do in production. You see customers use it, see, people use our designs that we've made, and then we get all the good benefits of that.